Are you predicting a bear market? It seems like every Friday all the doom and the gloom comes out of higher interest rates, lower stock prices. Can Ray Dalio predict negative 18% in the equity markets?
No, we've been long equity markets, and without getting too much into our positions.
Why not? Let's get into those positions.
I can tell you because we don't get into our positions. That's the why not. But anyway, I'm saying no. The answer to your question. I mean, eventually it comes along, but we're in a different environment now. Here's the difference. Okay.
And then David, jump in here.
From 2008 until 2017, we were in a certain type of environment. And that environment, it was one in which there was the pushing of interest rates down to the point of creating negative interest rates, and with a positive carry by doing quantitative easing to push money into the system. 2017 is the transition of an ending of all of that all around the world. And we are entering a new era in which there is going to be, and there is, the raising of interest rates and the reducing of quantitative easing. That action that they took in that produced significantly bad real interest rates. I mean, real interest rates today, 10-year on the 10-year real interest rates are about 0.5%.
Yeah, next to nothing.
Next to nothing. And the break-even inflation rate for 10 years is about 1.8%. So those numbers are very low because of, let's call it, repression in order to get the economy to do that. We are now in a transition, a whole different environment. That's the equivalent of entering the late stage of the cycle, and that's when there's a tightening. Tightenings become progressively more concerning because as you move along, they're more and more difficult to get perfect. So as we're progressing, we are entering a period of greater risk and the nature of the market. So when you look at the bond market right now, there is risk in the bond market. There looks to me as a significant amount of risk in the bond market. So now let's go to the policies that are behind it.
Well, let's bring in David. Go to the policies. The good news is Ray Dalio is not on the short list at the Fed.
Well, on that note, central banks squarely in focus here. We just heard from the ECB. We're waiting to hear who the president's going to pick to lead the Fed. Let me ask you a two-part question. How much does personality matter at the Federal Reserve? I look at John Taylor and think maybe he's a Ray Dalio kind of guy. He's got rules or principles of his own that he's held throughout his career. And on that note, what would you say to the next chair of the Fed to what he or she needs to focus on when it comes to the health of the U.S. economy?
Bunch of questions in there. So personality, again, I think the real question is principles. If you were to write them down and articulate them and then discuss them through history over a period of time, I think that's a good thing. They also have very different principles, and so such as matters in terms of quantitative easing and also whether it's too tight and too loose. So I do think it can matter a lot in terms of what the monetary policy is, particularly the notion of about the quantitative easing and whether it's too tight or too easy. It can matter a lot. And then we have the pace at which, from Fed policy, since we're talking about it, the pace at which there's an unwinding of the balance sheet. You know, I look at those numbers, and I don't think they're going to be able to continue that pace because it's equivalent of something like 2.5% of GDP. And if you have that happening at the same time as there's increased budget deficits, we could have a budget deficit increase of another 1.5% of GDP. That's a big number in the supply-demand of bonds. I mean, think about that. Okay, there's going to be that amount of effective selling of credit by the Federal Reserve.
Are you
big number.
predicting that with the tax reform proposed, as Douglas Holtz-Icahn talks about, we're going out to 5, 6, or 7% of deficit to GDP?
We will almost certainly have a significant move in that direction. So you could even see it in the market action. In other words, on days where it looks like they're making more progress, the bond market's more inclined to sell off. Days that they're making less progress, the bond market, because there's going to be probably a larger deficit, and that means more selling of bonds at the same time as there's more selling of bonds by the Federal Reserve in terms of the balance sheet change. Now, I think they'll be cautious in this, but when you're in this part of the cycle, it's very delicate.